On the Soul and the Resurrection by Saint Gregory of Nyssa. Part 3. But what, I asked, if insisting on the great differences which, in spite of a certain quality of matter shared alike by all elements in their visible form, exist between each particular kind of matter? Motion, for instance, is not the same in all, some moving up, some down, nor form nor quality either. If some one were to say that there was in the same manner, incorporated in or belonging to these elements, a certain force as well, which affects these intellectual insights and operations by a purely natural effort of their own, such effects, for instance, as we often see produced by the mechanists, in whose hands matter, combined according to the rules of art, thereby imitates nature, exhibiting resemblance not in figure alone, but even in motion, so that when the piece of mechanism sounds in its resonant part, it mimics a human voice, without, however, our being able to perceive anywhere any mental force working out the particular figure or character, sound, and movement. Suppose, I say, we were to affirm that all this was produced as well in the organic machine of our own natural bodies, without any intermixture of a special thinking substance, but owing simply to an inherent motive power of the elements within us, accomplishing by itself these operations, to nothing else in fact but an impulsive movement working for the cognition of the object before us. Would not then the fact stand proved of the absolute non-existence of that intellectual and impalpable being, the soul, which you talk of? Your instance, she replied, and your reasoning upon it, though belonging to the counter-argument, may both of them be made allies of our statement, and will contribute not a little to the confirmation of its truth. Why, how can you say that? Because, you see, so to understand, manipulate, and dispose the soulless matter, that the art which is stored away in such mechanisms becomes almost like a soul to the material, in all the various ways in which it mocks movement, in figure and voice, and so on, may be turned into a proof of there being something in man whereby he shows an innate fitness to think out within himself, through the contemplative and inventive faculties, such thoughts, and having prepared such mechanisms in theory, to put them into practice by manual skill, and exhibit in matter the product of his mind. First, for instance, he saw by dint of thinking that to produce any sound there is need of some wind, and then, with a view to produce wind in the mechanism, he previously ascertained by a course of reasoning and close observation of the nature of elements, that there is no vacuum at all in the world, but that the lighter is to be considered a vacuum only by comparison with the heavier, seeing that the air itself, taken as a separate subsistence, is crowded quite full. It is by an abuse of language that a jar is said to be empty, for when it is empty of any liquid, it is none the less, even in this state, full to the eyes of the experienced. A proof of this is that a jar, when put into a pool of water, is not immediately filled, but at first floats on the surface, because the air it contains helps to buoy up its rounded sides, till at last the hand of the drawer of the water forces it down to the bottom, and when there it takes in water by its neck, during which process it is shown not to have been empty even before the water came, for there is the spectacle of a sort of combat going on in the neck between the two elements, the water being forced by its weight into the interior, and therefore streaming in, the imprisoned air, on the other hand, being straitened for room by the gush of water along the neck, and so rushing in the contrary direction. Thus the water is checked by the strong current of air, and gurgles and bubbles against it. Men observed this, and devised, in accordance with this property of the two elements, a way of introducing air to work their mechanism. They made a cavity of some hard stuff, and prevented the air in it from escaping in any direction, and then introduced water into this cavity through its mouth, apportioning the quantity of water according to requirement. Next they allowed an exit in the opposite direction to the air, so that it passed into a pipe placed ready to hand, and in so doing, being violently constrained by the water, became a blast, and this, playing on the structure of the pipe, produced a note. Is it not clearly proved by such visible results that there is a mind of some kind in man, something other than that which is visible, which by virtue of an invisible thinking nature of its own, first prepares by inward invention such devices, and then, when they have been so matured, brings them to the light, and exhibits them in the subservient matter? For if it were possible to ascribe such wonders, as the theory of our opponents does, to the actual constitution of the elements, why, we should have these mechanisms building themselves spontaneously. The bronze would not wait for the artist to be made into the likeness of a man, but would become such by an innate force. The air would not require the pipe to make a note, but would sound spontaneously by its own fortuitous flux and motion. And the jet of the water upwards would not be, as it now is, the result of an artificial pressure, forcing it to move in an unnatural direction, but the water would rise into the mechanism of its own accord, finding in that direction a natural channel. But if none of these results are produced spontaneously by elemental force, but on the contrary, each element is employed at will by artifice, and if artifice is a kind of movement and activity of mind, will not the very consequences of what has been urged by way of objection show us mind as something other than the thing perceived? That the thing perceived, I replied, is not the same as the thing not perceived, I grant. But I do not discover any answer to our question in such a statement. It is not yet clear to me what we are to think that thing not perceived to be. All I have been shown by your argument is that it is not anything material, and I do not yet know the fitting name for it. I wanted especially to know what it is, not what it is not. We do learn, she replied, much about many things by this very same method, inasmuch as in the very act of saying a thing is not so and so, we, by implication, interpret the very nature of the thing in question. For instance, when we say guileless, we indicate a good man. When we say unmanly, we have expressed the idea that the man is a coward. And it is possible to suggest a great many things in like fashion, wherein we either convey the idea of goodness by the negation of badness, or vice versa. Well then, if one thinks so with regard to the matter now before us, one will not fail to gain a proper conception of it. The question is, what are we to think of mind in its very essence? Now, granted that the inquirer has had his doubts set at rest as to the existence of the thing in question, owing to the activities which it displays to us, and only wants to know what it is, he will have adequately discovered it by being told that it is not that which our senses perceive, neither a color, nor a form, nor a hardness, nor a weight, nor a quantity, nor a cubic dimension, nor a point, nor anything else perceptible in matter. Supposing, that is, that there does exist a something beyond all these. Here I interrupted her discourse. If you leave all these out of the account, I do not see how you can possibly avoid cancelling along with them the very thing which you are in search of. I cannot at present conceive to what, as apart from these, the perceptive activity is to cling. For on all occasions in investigating with the scrutinizing intellect the contents of the world, we must, so far as we put our hand at all on what we are seeking, inevitably touch, as blind men feeling along the walls for the door, some one of the things aforesaid. We must come on color, or form, or quantity, or something else on your list. And when it comes to saying that the thing is none of them, our feebleness of mind induces us to suppose that it does not exist at all. "Shame on such absurdity," said she, indignantly interrupting. "A fine conclusion this narrow-minded, grovelling view of the world brings us to. If all that is not cognizable by sense is to be wiped out of existence, the all-embracing power that presides over things is admitted by this same assertion not to be. Once a man has been told about the non-material and invisible nature of the deity, he must perforce with such a premise reckon it as absolutely non-existent. If, on the other hand, the absence of such characteristics, in his case, does not constitute any limitation on his existence, how can the mind of man be squeezed out of existence along with this withdrawal, one by one, of each property of matter?" "Well, then," I retorted, "we only exchange one paradox for another in arguing in this way. For our reason will be reduced to the conclusion that the deity and the mind of man are identical, if it be true that neither can be thought of except by the withdrawal of all the data of sense." "Say not so," she replied. "To talk so also is blasphemous. Rather, as the Scripture tells you, say that the one is like the other. For that which is made in the image of the deity necessarily possesses a likeness to its prototype in every respect. It resembles it in being intellectual, immaterial, unconnected with any notion of weight, and in eluding any measurement of its dimensions. Yet, as regards its own peculiar nature, it is something different from that other. Indeed, it would no longer be an image if it were altogether identical with that other. But where we have a big letter alpha in that uncreate prototype, we have a little letter alpha in the image. Just as in a minute particle of glass, when it happens to face the light, the complete disk of the sun is often to be seen, not represented thereon in proportion to its proper size, but so far as the minuteness of the particle admits of its being represented at all. Thus do the reflections of those ineffable qualities of deity shine forth within the narrow limits of our nature. And so our reason, following the lead of these reflections, will not miss grasping the mind in its essence by clearing away from the question all corporeal qualities. Nor, on the other hand, will it bring the pure and infinite existence to the level of that which is perishable and little. It will regard this essence of the mind as an object of thought only, since it is the image of an existence which is such. But it will not pronounce this image to be identical with the prototype. Just, then, as we have no doubts, owing to the display of a divine, mysterious wisdom in the universe, about a divine being and a divine power existing in it all, which secures its continuance, though if you required a definition of that being, you would therein find the deity completely sundered from every object in creation, whether of sense or thought, while in these last, too, natural distinctions are admitted. So, too, there is nothing strange in the soul's separate existence as a substance, whatever we may think that substance to be, being no hindrance to her actual existence, in spite of the elemental atoms of the world not harmonizing with her in the definition of her being. In the case of our living bodies, composed as they are from the blending of these atoms, there is no sort of communion, as has been just said, on the score of substance, between the simplicity and invisibility of the soul and the grossness of those bodies. But notwithstanding that, there is not a doubt that there is in them the soul's vivifying influence, exerted by a law which it is beyond the human understanding to comprehend. Not even, then, when those atoms have again been dissolved into themselves, has that bond of a vivifying influence vanished. But as, while the framework of the body still holds together, each individual part is possessed of a soul which penetrates equally every component member, and one could not call that soul hard and resistant, though blended with the solid, nor humid or cold, or the reverse, though it transmits life to all and each of such parts. So, when that framework is dissolved, and has returned to its kindred elements, there is nothing against probability that that simple and incomposite essence, which has once for all, by some inexplicable law, grown with the growth of the bodily framework, should continually remain beside the atoms with which it has been blended, and should in no way be sundered from a union once formed. For it does not follow that because the composite is dissolved, the incomposite must be dissolved with it. End of Part 3 of On the Soul and the Resurrection.